there's a reference to Occam's razor. Jim, do you remember where exactly that is? I have to check. But somewhere, her work, her method is characterized as a kind of version of Occam's razor. I think that it might be interesting to look at that.
Okay, Randy,
Yeah.
can I step in?
Yeah.
I want to dovetail on Bill's question, and
Should I start recording? I'll record.
I don't know. Okay,
Oh.
but what the question is here? Like, let's say, phenomenology can be qualified as descriptive metaphysics, and descriptive metaphysics describes our concepts about the world, the sense that we give to the into this picture of the world. It's sense-based. However, we treat, or it seems that there is a claim to describing reality as it is in itself, the extramental reality, in how you presented or how we understand Conrad-Martius. So the question is, what's the ground for the claim to description of the real? Bill, is that resonant with what you asked? Is that similar?
Yeah, that's very close to what I'm trying to say.
I have the same question, Randy. See, Husserl suspends the claim to realistic suppositions in the very beginning, and he comes out of this melange of philosophy in the 19th century, where epistemology and metaphysics are blended and united, and it's impossible to differentiate one from the other. So he extracts epistemology from metaphysics on the condition that this kind of epistemology is epistemology, period, that it doesn't make any realistic claims, realistic or irrealistic or other realistic, however we say it. But in Conrad-Martius, there seems to be a different thesis, a thesis that metaphysics is describing the real in a manner it does so in Aristotle, for example. So how do we know? I don't mean being human here, and it's not a skeptical question, but it's simply a question: is what is the ground for realistic claims in Conrad-Martius' ontology, or in how you present it? You know, how you presented it as a ground for mathematics, etc. And again, it's not a challenging question, just a curiosity question.
I think that's, I'm sorry. I think that's getting at I think that's getting at a real fundamental issue here. Is what she or Husserl is doing just describing human thinking and human thoughts? And I think there's a real fundamental issue here that I think both Conrad-Martius and Husserl are denying that. If you really look, they're talking about what is consciousness. And the very nature and essence of consciousness is that to which the real is manifest. And perhaps when you're asking what is the ground of that, maybe there's not something that's self-grounding. And this is a super difficult and fundamental question. So, but I think that's part of what's really going on here, that it really has to do, what do we even mean by consciousness and thought and awareness? And its very essence is the disclosure of being. And
yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I want to say second that after having said that, and I think I think Husserl comes at that a little bit late because of it seems to me something like an idealistic predilection. But I think that for Conrad-Martius, the reduction, as she says often enough, the reduction explains why we have such an indifference to nature in the various senses, but we mean the whole natural show, including us, and yet not including us, because we are also that to which nature shows itself. But Husserl and many thinkers of the same vein, Fichte, Louis Lavelle, Lesso Schelling, they're very thin on nature. It's as if the world were primarily made of spirits, and the connection between the non-spiritual world and nature is not an interesting theme. And she feels that as I think Husserl came to realize that you really don't reduce this naive or this spontaneous appreciation of being. You may, as it were, put it on ice or disengage it, but it's still, as Jeremy suggests, that an initial inseparability of being and being aware. And if you remember, that Conrad-Martius herself says it's the Cartesian move misses, it's cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. She says, no, sum ergo cogito. There's a sense of being prior, which makes possible the argument of Descartes. And similarly, the reduction of being, of the natural, in the natural attitude, and then the move towards the display of being, the manifestation of being through our intentional agency, becomes the whole of philosophy for Husserl. That bothers Conrad-Martius, because she thinks nature is still an encompassing, and I think today we find out, when we're thinking about consciousness in terms of the categories, mostly reductionistic, of neurophysiology. And so what the point is then perhaps that when she says, no, what is there about this, what we take for most for granted, namely the true being of something, the really real, what is there about that? And then she's, through an analysis of being stands in itself, it's not a result of my bestowing on it anything. And in fact, in my bestowing, I want to make sure I'm not just making things up. As I think I've mentioned before, the Königswald and Wolfgang Kramer, the school of neo-Kantianism, wanted to insert this, that the life of the mind vis-a-vis being or anything around it was a form of constitution, but constituting in such a way that what I display is not dependent on the occasional act right now of displaying. It's independent of it. They were concerned about this Kant's language of constitution, because it sounds like you're making, and even the meanings you're seeing, you're making. If that's so, then we are reduced to a solipsism. And she was concerned about that. So she thought she could, in fact, offer an understanding of something as being really real, where it rested in itself and arose from out of itself. And that the kind of analysis of substance. Now, how does she know that? Beyond that, there's a certain level in which all philosophy rests in what might be called an intuition. But if it's compelling, then it no longer has the kind of deleterious, pejorative sense of an intuition as somebody's private insight, but it has the same for us all quality. and admittedly her working on the very notion of substance and how it spins off into heletic being and pneumatic being, you know, is something of a challenge, at least to the imagination, and it seems sometimes pushed and stretched and somewhat idiosyncratic. But to a great extent, I think she's very close to in this business of what distinguishes materiality from spirit and from consciousness. But you have to presuppose that consciousness is always already, as it were, in symbiosis with being. Consciousness doesn't make sense apart from being, nor, and this is certainly the Husserlian point, does being make sense apart from consciousness. We have no other display of being than through consciousness. But that display cannot be a form of poesis. There has to be something else going on there. And she offers a elaborate theory. You saw when you read the pneumatic stuff. She has a theory of how the spirit is inseparably the luminosity, the light of being. And light must meet light in order for there to be light. You recall that phrase that if you don't have physical light, you can't see in the woods. But if there's only a physical light or an artificial light in the woods, there's nothing going on either. Squirrels need light. Bats, I don't know what bats know. They don't see very well, and they're not interested in seeing. They have sound. But certainly you and I in the woods, in the absence of some sort of light, wouldn't see anything, even though we'd be sentient and conscious. But then when the artificial light comes on, like a flashlight, then the woods lights up, or the moonlight. But moonlight alone doesn't light up the woods. It's kind of Aristotle's mistake. He forgets that. It seems to be in many of his discussions. Okay, so I think the question of the criteriology of her claims. I think that the criteria are those of any philosopher. If it's all BS, if it's all a fantastic narrative, it loses its philosophical interest. But just one more point though, on the crisis, I think this is a cultural crisis. Capitalism reduces our social and economic interactions to a quantitative status, which increasingly is being specified in terms of the returns on Wall Street. I've got a litany of tragedies that are happening right now, like our local retirement community losing its gem, namely an actual healthcare facility for right on campus, but they weren't making any money, so they pulled that out. For scores of families that are living here, they're in my age and older, if you can believe that, they're in crisis. What are they going to do? The wife might be healthy and the husband ill, but that's why they're at this place. Where do you go when you're in your 80s and 90s? And you're just getting used to this place, and so forth and so on. But what determines this fundamental value, this fundamental right of healthcare, is made by the decisions made by Wall Street. That is a dramatic form also of people telling you what nature is, the nature you experience. You don't know anything about nature, the word on the street is, until you talk to a mathematical physicist. So your sense of nature in a lived body, your sense of nature as it's covered, laminated over with all the abstractions of our culture, or the narratives, the mythic narratives of our culture, doesn't mean anything. And we have this sharp criticism of the Copernican view, or the pre-Copernican view of nature. And she's a maverick. She's taking all of those laminations on and saying no. But Husserl was more modest. You can't, colors don't mean anything, sounds don't mean anything. They go, what really means something, and then they go into the reductionist version of it. Not that that's wrong, and that's the important thing. It's not all capricious power move on the side of the scientific. We have benefited, everybody knows that, enormously from science. Science is good, but how does it connect with our experience? And how are the scientists experiencing the nature they describe? None of them has experienced the Big Bang. None of them has experienced the amino acid or an electron, strictly speaking, and they don't fit into their treatment of nature. Is the human experience of nature to give way to the new post-Einsteinian or whatever view of nature? And she says no. It cannot, and it may not, and it should not. And so what we have here is a rather bold effort to relate, in Husserl's terms, the life world, and eventually with the post-Einsteinian world and post-Darwinian world. So I don't know if that, Bill, where's Bill go? There, Bill, love, I'm not hearing you well. You're dealing with an old fart here. So my wife keeps telling me, get your hearing aids fixed, and I didn't do it yet. So I missed your question. Would you mind saying it once again? Or would somebody?
If I could just jump in, if I could just jump in a second, I think getting back to the question Bill asked and what Randy said and what Jim just said, I think these are all very close, because one thing Bill was asking about string theory and how that relates to Conrad-Martius's speculations about nature. And is it all somehow the same or not? And then I thought what Randy said was very interesting there, because and how I kind of put that together is, it's not that there's no distinction between a philosophical question and what we call a scientific question. And it's not that science doesn't have what is usually called science doesn't have its own methods and integrity. It does. However, if we're asking, what do we mean by understanding? And the understanding that everyone has to have in order to even think at all. What does it mean to understand nature or to understand matter, or that you can't have the so-called standard scientific understanding without the more fundamental understanding that's rooted in the life world and that people like Conrad-Martius are attempting to explore and make explicit. So I was really interested, and I think that's what you're saying too, Jim. And I think getting back to what Randy was saying, I thought that was very interesting about how our culture, and you're saying this too, Jim, our culture kind of teaches us and gets us to unwittingly assume that somehow there's this thing called science, and that's the real solid thing. And somehow everything else is based on that. And what you, Jim, and Husserl and Conrad-Martius are saying, no, that is wrong. That's really wrong. And it's a disaster that we can't have what we call, even what we call science without the life world and without the life world itself being truthful. Unless the life world is truthful and real, there's no such thing as reality at all, and there's no such thing as science. Mm-hmm. And again, to pull it all together, and I think that was very inspiring what Randy was saying, our whole culture is telling us that we're not allowed to be having this conversation, in a sense. that we just ineluctably assume that there's a huge problem here, not that it's easy, but that we need to regain a more integral view. But it's not a view that messes everything up and says everything is one and there are no distinctions and there are no. And that's why I think what Conrad-Martius and Husserl and a lot of these people are doing is interesting, because they get into all the problems, but they're striving toward a kind of unity.
Let me ask the question a different way. I'm going to ask it from the point of view of Putnam. What's Putnam's first name? I can't remember now. Hillary, right. And so I read this many years ago, about 30 years ago, and it really struck me when he was critiquing metaphysical realism. And basically he said that all our best theories could be wrong. And the point is that it's possible that a true theory would be completely incomprehensible to us. And so if metaphysical realism is correct. And so this is the problem I have no problem with what Jeremy was saying or with what Jim is saying or what Randy is saying. But I still think that it's always a human project. And this whole idea of metaphysical realism or not is, to sort of paraphrase Putnam, is a waste of time. And so that's really my main point, is that that's what it seems to me. And so what I think Conrad-Martius is about is essentially saying that we posit a real world. We live in a real world. We have a sense of a real world. What must be true? This is like a transcendental question now. What must be true of that real world if we are to posit such a world? And it's still a human world. And I think that's what she's about. It's still a human project. It's still phenomenology. It's not metaphysical realism is what I'm trying to say, but she may argue with me and say that I'm wrong.
Well, see, when Putnam says that it might be incomprehensible, like a ultimate, true theory of nature and reality, I think that's wrong. I think that it might be incomprehensible, but it might be like super comprehensible, or like something we overlook, something in our own inhumanity, in our ideologies. And when we go into, what only now is thematized as capitalism, patriarchy, etc. When we do the inhuman thing, which is also kind of a very human thing, when we fall from grace, we're becoming inhuman. And just like we want to be, scientific and we want to be positivist, but phenomenology, we want to be more positivist than the positivists in a certain sense. We want to be more human than the humanists or anyone who proposes that they have like the human theory or like what the human is, because we are human. We have that immediate experience of being human and being in a world and being a part of reality and having even access to truth, and having a mind that not only does a bunch of wrong stuff, but does a little good too. So like, I think that what's really human is to have that ultimate, not incomprehensible, but maybe something we're overlooking, and I think that's what you have in Conrad-Martius, is something that connects to a sense of ultimate reality that religions have been saying for years in their own ways, is the ultimate reality and is the foundation for reality, real reality, nature, the real natural world around us, the concrete physical world, but also like all the possibilities of all the other things that could exist and that do exist in different ways than a physical, real, substantial natural world. And that ultimate reality might take the form of something that is only incomprehensible so far as we don't have the spiritual attitude and we are shut down to this foundational situation, which is maybe like, and so for me, the reason I'm saying all this is because mysticism, and I don't just mean whatever Bertrand Russell meant or something, but the real mysticism that one in their heart knows is going on when they read the biographies of a saint or a mystic from any tradition, the Vedic, the story of the Buddha, Lao Tzu, like any of that stuff totally rings true for us, because there is a kind of thing that's being articulating, it's articulating the inarticulable. It's like Aristotle founding the magnitudes of reality, all the nature of things on something that is without magnitude. A megathase, the first mover is like this. And so all that metaphysical stuff, the topics of the metaphysics is foundational for the stuff in the physics. So Aristotle does it his way. And, people might say that's antiquated or something, and in some respects, maybe so, but it's also got something that the contemporary inhumanity of science going out in these incomprehensible directions, going after that incomprehensible ultimate theory that's just maybe beyond us. It's just more within us, so it's something that I think children will understand better than us adults with our sclerotic minds, all sedimented in our habits of bizarre ideation, all the weird things we do, the patriarchal rituals, the capitalism, and the belief, the faith in like money being value, that kind of thing. Like, I'm not arguing for anarchy or something, but rather for the real arche, the real, what really rules is this ultimate theory, and it's not incomprehensible, but we do overlook it, so we don't comprehend it. And I think there's like a kind of conspiracy to maintain these boundaries that compartmentalize us, to keep us in institutions and walls, I mean, so I'm arguing for mysticism.
Let me ask a question though. So there is a world of science and there is a life world which has to be restored. And there seems to be a social world. And so there are all these intentional worlds posited. But this raises two problems. First of all, what would be the foundation of a unified world that we need to posit in case we have to make a valid claim for truth or to truth? And then the second question will be, so what is the nature of our relationship or our position in this real world? Is intentionality a natural phenomenon? Then how so? And is there such a thing as intentionality altogether if we posit a picture of unified world, and this world is a natural world? Then what is intentionality? Is intentionality altogether? So again, it's not a challenge, but just simple logic of questioning. So yeah. So I'd like to see if Conrad-Martius, how does she solve this question? The natural givenness of the natural world as a foundation for all sciences and for our own givenness, that's a great platform. But then how do we work our way up from this platform to the possibility of knowledge? That's another way to formulate the same, I think.
So can I say something real quick? I think that there's a kind of example. This is where I go to answer this kind of thing. I think the best example of this can actually be found in those ancients, in Plato, especially. When he's like reaching for the good, and giving you the famous line we all teach in our 101. In the Republic, there's this segmentation, and it gets finer and finer into the dianoia, and above that the nous, and similarly in Aristotle, who's very true to Plato in many respects. He's got a similar situation with his understanding of the spheres, and maybe Plato does too, with the spheres having the first mover as the outermost, or maybe even in some points it sounds like it's the innermost. In any case, it's the non-moving, like the center of the centrifuge, or the outermost, the infinite sphere moving, the way it does. The activity, the consciousness, because he asks in the metaphysics, he asks like, well, what does it think? And the response is like, it thinks like with the heart or something like that. Like it thinks with the emotions. I'm paraphrasing, but you know, there's a kind of like way to dwell even beyond the mind, even beyond intentionality, and all things from the physical hyletic substantiality of reality to where it becomes more and more noetic. You know, it seems to have a kind of line indication, like a radiation that's the indication of intentionality. The core of intentionality is indication, you know, and it's the indication you do with mind, consciousness, with meaning, you know, and ultimately motivation is behind that. And so, you know, you get into the ethical axiological domain of like semantics, ethics, and aesthetics all at once, the side that gives the formalistic and the informed matter world of nature, the physis, its meaning, its purpose, the telos, you know, and the arche is the telos too. So my point is that there is an unarticulated axiological dimension behind all of the stuff we do formally, formalistically, mathematically, you know, ontologically, and that's just a product of the compartmentalization. We don't have, all we have is subjective theories or subjectively founded theories of ethics and aesthetics, except for maybe like one core idea that like there's an ultimate good and maybe it's connected to the God, and somehow, you know, the angels have some kind of power there that's like the God, and you know, some kind of system like that. And it's very mythological, but that has to be indirect as yet, because the axiological truth, you know, is something that we can't get to yet. So I don't think there's real great precedent for understanding the big questions of like where we're going to go. But like the foundation and the system of Kant in his method, doctrine of method, he describes it as like the Tower of Babel. Like he does have this foundation and he has like a general sort of outline we build up, you know, and he outlines like transcendental sciences that one day we can have. And Husserl does the same in the analyses of possible passive and active synthesis. You know, he has like a sort of Tower of Babel situation for these, the direction that the sciences should go. We have to put them on a real foundation, on the ultimate real foundation, the truth, and then we can build up. And there's a sort of, you know, intentionality to that. And what do we do when we get up? You know, or where does it go? What happens? What's the world like in that situation? We're not sure.
Yeah, that's the problem. You see, when I taught, when I was a teacher in the Gurdjieffian or Gurdjieff style school early on, there was a certain kind of a picture of the world that we grounded the teaching in, and that was called the scale of hydrogens. And the scale of hydrogens, it's that presupposes that everything, it's basically a scale of substances, or just one infinitely thinning out substance which goes in layers from solids to completely ethereal and subtle and incorporeal things, and ends in pure I am, or the unknown, etc. So there is this hyletic pluralism which is developing out of the concept of this tower, Platonic in its origin. But first of all, it has several problems. You know, if it's taken to its logical kind of full expression, it creates a problem of individuality, of course, but then it also creates a suspicion that it is already a mathematized picture of the world. Because the moment the spheres walk in, this is already mathematics. This is already Galilean universe.
Well, now, I mean, those are very different things like mathematics certainly is the core, right? This like mathesis idea, the mathesis universalis, which really just means learning. It means the same thing as the sapientia universalis, right? But this is like the invisible core behind mathematics and the Galilean and the contemporary wacky theories of strings and such.
No. It's at the times of Plato, it's known that Plato was a student or had some relationship with or Pythagoreans, with Orphic school, etc. Plato in Sicily, etc., and his dialogues. These guys, they had a concept of 10 spheres. And they had a number of 10. The Descartes already was operating in philosophy. And the idea of hierarchical spheres operated as well. So, one can discuss as to what degree and how this kind of primitive geometry proceeded into mathematics, but it's already the geometricized world. It's already not the world of the natural, completely natural attitude. That one exists in Empedocles and then shows up in Empedocles, gets abstracted maybe in Parmenides, I'm not sure about that, but then it proceeds into what today we have as skeptical empiricism. And so we have the problem here, I think, with how human thought in general operates. And it's a Kantian problem. And it seriously undermines the conception of getting at the reality of the world by means other than science with measurements and with experiments, with all the positivistic verification apparatus. It's a big problem. I'm not offering any solutions. I hope that there are solutions, but otherwise one is just suspended in this, vicious circle. And it begins with Plato and Pythagoreans.
Can I suggest that there are at least two different perspectives? This mathematical mathematization that you're talking about, Olga. So I don't know a lot about this, but I know that the scholastics had a big problem with, when they talked about the properties of God, for example, whether they were analogical, that's the right word, or in some ways more equivocal or univocal, whatever. And so, getting back to the text, Conrad-Martius talks about, or at least Jim describes an analog that Conrad-Martius used for describing her notion of the actual present as a tangent line moving around the circle. And so she's not saying, and Jim's not saying that is actually what the absolute or the actual present looks like, but it's an attempt to create an analog, I think, for us to understand it. And so mathematics, in as much as we understand mathematics, serves as an analog for something that is perhaps beyond any exact conceptualization and therefore serves some purpose. Does that make sense, that distinction?
I think I'm understanding better the drift of your concerns, and I'm sorry for not having grasped it earlier. I think in some ways what we're asking about is the merits, the value of philosophy or science, period, both of them, to life as what we're most concerned about. And I don't mean to say that philosophy can't be a form of life or science, but if we want, it seems we all do want to be able to ask and answer the question, what is the life most what life is most worth living, just like we want to know what is the knowledge most worth having. And our situation as finite beings, as human beings, is that we are, as Pascal says, we're a synthesis of infinity and finitude. I'm telling the story quickly, but going back then to Husserl and Conrad-Martius, I think they both are saying that we begin as conscious of being, and what the task of philosophy and science is to take that infinite extension, which is the mind's teleology, and give it intention, inclusion, specification, form. And the dance that we're called to do is to keep the infinite extension in line with our specifications, our inclusions, our intention with an S, not with a T. And we really can't do it, frankly. I don't think so. Unless we have something like faith, unless something like we have an overarching quasi-intuitive relationship with everything that does justice, at least in a implicit way, to the abstractions, and as not as a bad word, but precisely as the forms by which we carve up the whole. And the now the truth of the way we the sortal delineations, the conceptual delineations of the whole, and we're always concerned about the whole. Even someone who claims to be merely concerned about the part, and exclusively concerned about the part. By that, just like with Husserl, if he's bracketing out that other thing, why? Is he afraid of it? Is she afraid of it? Is it too much trouble? Does it lead, as Kant says, to the babble of the history of metaphysics? But we are concerned about the whole. So I think, and I may be imposing, laminating on top of Olga's concerns, her pet concern, and I share it with her, of the importance of religious experience or mystical experience for the human life. And in some ways, as Randy was suggesting, as in some sense tied, we have in our culture, we've lost a sense, it's almost embarrassing to use the word wisdom. It's something that has been treated so dismissively because of the protagonists of being wise have been often wise in the guise of being ridiculous. And we know that wisdom doesn't come easy, and it doesn't come without moral virtue. And so maybe it was humility that led us to be disdainful of wisdom, but I think now, as Randy suggests, we've gone down the wrong path. And philosophy must remember that its etymological mandate is philein sophia. And now the context, though, is that we are in difficulty. We have in our culture, and many of us are familiar, we have the expertise of philosophy, say in the quote unquote analytic tradition, but phenomenology can get pretty darn analytic too. And to be skilled and to succeed and to get promoted and tenured in this tradition, we have to in fact get pretty good at basking and dwelling in abstractions and being able to manipulate them and be consistent, and that can become the world for us. But certainly a fortiori in physics, in chemistry, in biology, and so forth. These are worlds unto themselves, but they're only illegitimately so for the philosopher or for the thoughtful human being. And so I guess I'm saying it a long way. I'm not sure that either Bill or Olga are asking anything more about and offering a kind of ode or a dirge to being human, and also wanting the truth in it with a capital T. I think it's only through faith and some grace of mysticism that in fact we're going to have that telos of philosophy, the wisdom, which is surpassable.
Thank you, Jim. May I respond, Randy?
Yeah, and Andreas wants to say something for a little while. So
yes, but I would cede to Olga and add my remarks later if you allow.
okay, so after Olga.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah. Jim, I resonate with you, but I also think that that aspect of knowledge, which is deeply human, can and have to be, so to say, operationalized. The feature of religious experience is that it's not an experience of an object. So faith is, I mean, it's a faculty of the soul, but it's also a mental faculty. It's the faculty of knowledge. But it's a kind of knowledge which does not objectify posit objects. It doesn't. It's more, and this idea, I actually got it from Teresa Timinetska, who avoided at all cost the ontology of objects. And he believed that objectification is the feature of the mind which it doesn't stop us exactly from knowing reality, because this is the language we speak. This is the like, in a sense, a symbolic system that we impose on reality based on our embodiment. Like, we have a shape, we are objects ourselves, and so we relate to the extramental world by means of our theory of objects. But in Timinetska, for example, the theory of objects is not used at all in describing life. For her, life is a set of expressions or relationship, and the objects, they are already the function of the mind, kind of superimposed on it. So that's in that sense, when we do science, or like, let's say, if we do mathematics and write some kind of formulas describing a nature, they describe a process, a form of relationships. They can be capturing hyletics or hylomorphic aspect of reality, but most of those formulas are really describing relationships. And so the metaphysics of truth is then becoming a metaphysics of relationships, in the same manner that as Husserl's formal ontology is, and not the metaphysics of objects. And that's the main kind of a pillar of operationalizing non-object giving types of experience as means of truth. But I think that this is more important in our present context as a ground of comparison or dialogue with what Conrad-Martius brings in, because I see what she is doing, and I may be wrong, I didn't read enough of her. Hers is a pure metaphysics of objects. And so in that sense, she will be very different from Timinetska.
I don't think it's that different. Like with Whitehead, he's very concerned about objects, but they're eternal objects, And in their eternal objectivity, they're always related to they're a superject, and that's what object means, and it's related to a subject. So there's a subjective process that gives us these objects in their eternality. I mean, the Whiteheadian system of a philosophy of nature is very a great analog. Anyone who knows Whitehead, you can kind of plug in Whitehead with Tymieniecka, with Conrad-Martius. I mean, this focusing on objects isn't necessarily the same kind of, usual mundane naturalized focusing on objects. And I think you're right. The theory of relations, or the like kind of theory of relations operating in phenomenology, it is at the same time, I'm not saying you're saying this, but focusing on this idea as it's like a theory, it's some kind of relations, it's about relations. And that is to set aside the whole like pure objectivity thing that science in the naturalized sense has going for it. But ultimately this is also compatible with a mathematical theory of relations that Husserl was working on early on, and also compatible with the like mystical mathematics of like the romantic, strain, where ultimately everything is founded on this relation between the self and God, or the center and the periphery of the infinite sphere, or however it's articulated. It's a relationship, and it's a kind of living relationship that we experience all around us, and that's the true, deep spiritual dimension of an object in the perspective of all these people like Whitehead and Tymieniecka. I'm not as familiar with the specific. Maybe I'm not familiar with what you're referring to with Tymieniecka. I mean, just with personal dialogues with her, but and it's fascinating. I'm on board with her. I think she's one of the great philosopher, scientists, sages, or mystics, or saints, perhaps.
Her ground thesis is very different from the one of Conrad-Martius.
What are you referring?
That's what I am saying. Well, for her, there are no reality to the objects in the sense of a foundational reality. She limits herself, first of all, to the discussion of life. And second, she, at great length, attempts avoiding objectification.
Yeah. I mean, I think whatever maneuver she's doing allows her to engage with what the other mode of science, the more like popular, pedestrian mode of science, treats as just objects, and that's what we're dealing with. That's what we're focusing on.
She herself, she would object to being placed into the same kind of category and group with Conrad-Martius. She held herself very different and treated Conrad-Martius with great caution.
Interesting.
Honestly, yeah.
And somebody else want to come in? I'm a little uncomfortable with this kind of a reproach of our attention being turned to objects.
Okay.
And we know that I think we all know that most philosophical traditions, but certainly the phenomenological and the existential traditions, have a rich theory of non-objective, pre-reflective knowing. But but we can't avoid objects, because if we want to say what pre-reflective knowing is, or even if there is such a thing, a non-intentional knowing, a non-conceptual knowing, we have to make our case, or to be thoughtful about it privately, we have to reflect on it and see what predicates emerge. Now, in the case then of the issue at hand, namely whether we in fact want to do a radically non-objective metaphysics, or when we're talking about the issues of transcendence, which could only be experienced and dimly experienced, typically, because as soon as we conceptualize them, we make a distorted, feeble object of what is essentially transcendent to our efforts to conceptualize it. That's one matter, but we can only do philosophy of this subject matter by rendering it somehow a subject of predication. If it absolutely resists that process of objectification, absolutely, even by a way of a via negativa, then I'm afraid we're reduced to silence.
I see. Okay.
Now, it seems to me that what we have, we can go back then to the Conrad-Martius. She, in fact, she doesn't have much to say about the pre-reflective and so forth. Those are late phenomenological moves. But the issue that we have, if we're going to talk about what's ultimate and what's of concern to us, I think we're kind of, as philosophers, and not just, I don't mean merely, as mystics or as would-be mystics or as people of faith or whatever the right epithet in this case might be, we have to some sense be interested in predication if we're philosophizing. And we have to take the pre-thetic or the pre-thematic, the pre-conceptual, and do as best we can in rendering it conceptual. I'm going to stop there because I think I've lost my drift and I'm imposing on you.
Maybe I can respond, Jim, but I'm concerned by taking too much time.
So-
Randy, up to you. Do you want us to continue this discussion, or maybe Andreas would step in and maybe up to you? How do you want to?
Yeah, I want us to continue all discussions in our imaginations or whatever in eternity. But Andreas.
No, please. I would love to cede to Olga and Jim, and I took some notes. Maybe later there will be an opportunity to give some annotations that I put down.
Well, I wonder maybe we can bring this very discussion to bear with us as we look at like pneumatic substance, for example, or earlier in the book, the idea of like this difference between substantial being, I mean, I was like really thinking hard on it recently. I mean, I feel like the Conrad-Martius distinctions between like being and actualized being, there's more, it seems to me, and I'm curious if I'm getting this right, that there's more being or kinds of being, than there is the actualized real being, and then there's the substantial being that I don't know if those are totally identical. I mean, I'm just reflecting. Like when my head's in the book, I think I get it a lot better. But I'm trying to bring it into, with me around. So, I mean, I can also direct us in the book a bit to like somewhere that I have in mind. I could use my little googly thing that I made as well. But I mean, what do you think, Jim? Is that like a decent way of putting it? That there's like more being out there than real actual being. Is that good? And then B, is the real actual being the same thing as like substantiality or substantial being?
Well, you've hinted already that I think in what you said, Randy, that for her, there is more than actual being. You have probably one of the most nuanced metaphysics of potential being, because it's in some ways it's more real than actual being. It's a hyper kind of being, and yet it still is potential, but it's so that's part of my answer there. Let's see, what was the other point that you were making?
Well, the first, right, that there's more being than the real actual, and is the real actual the same thing as substantial?
Sorry?
Substance, is substantial being the same thing as the real actual being?
I think so. I think we can say that. However, the whole realm, the aeonic world periphery made up of entelechies has a peculiar kind of super actuality.
Right.
Super actuality. And and what's interesting, to go back to our earlier discussion, for her, the intellect as this light of being is, as it were, at home in all possible being. Intellect is, as it were, as I think Plato calls it, the home of the forms. And she's comfortable with that. And that's the whole theme of a universal consciousness has this universal extension, and it's beginning no intention, no inclusion. But that's the light of being which we bring to everything. Universal extension. The da, she even uses Heidegger's words, delictum. So the illumination, the clearing. So this elevated state of mind leaves nothing out. And the now, so the whole realm of the aeonic world periphery, in some sense, is pre-intended by intellect. It's constitutive of intellect, but it's in an implicit way. But that is the light of being, the light of intellect. And but we're going, to our earlier kind of oblique references to kind of a mystical experience or religious experience, that always still remains implicit, always. It's never a maximal illumination or actualization of this equivalent somewhat of Aristotle's passive intellect.
Yeah.
And I think that's the answer to Olga's question about how do we unite the life world and the scientific view, or all the different realms of science. I think what you've just stated, Jim, is basically the answer to that somehow at the beginning, the light of being constitutes us as a conscious being, and that is what holds everything together.
No. It's but as insofar as we're religious people, the adumbrations or the symbolizations or the groping for that fullness is also a lodestone, also a magnet, and she doesn't have much to say about that, but I think faith would be the more traditional way of talking about that. She doesn't have anything to say about mystical experiences, as far as I know. She was Pentecostal, so it was presumably it wasn't a foreign concept for her, and so the prayer life of a Pentecostal, if it's anything, it's in some sense quasi-mystical.
I was also thinking about the role of faith and trust in this. And maybe this is obvious, but it suddenly hit me. If we have an idea of the implicit, that in some sense is an intuition, must be. And yet it's an intuition of that which is beyond ourselves. So our relationship to the implicit, by the very nature of what we even mean by implicit, is yes, intuition, but must also be trust. Yeah. Trust is inseparable from the intuition of the implicit.
Very good. I think that's right. And as you know, Lavelle would say that too. This is a basic sense in which some philosophers like Jaspers and like Lavelle, philosophy's writing on faith all the time. It's the faith in the implicit, the faith to make explicit the implicit, the faith to make a passive synthesis an active synthesis. All these forms that we trust that our passive syntheses, speaking as Husserlian, we trust really implicitly in the sense of unconditionally in the accuracy of our passive syntheses to render what for us will become foundational reflections in explications of passive syntheses.
And that's part of it, but isn't there the whole question of somehow implicit we know that being is present? Now that is not something that can somehow be actualized. That's not some sort of passivity that can be realized in an active synthesis the way more mundane things like the other side of the house can be. Right. But even that is also essentially, it is an intuition, but also from which a unique kind of trust is inseparable.
Yeah, I think so.
So. Can I, I want to be gentle in my response, and I don't know how much I will succeed. But when we experience, like let's say, as you, Jeremy, you say, when we experience the presence of being, we intuit this very foundational, have this very foundational intuition of the presence of being. I mean, I think that we do, or I do experience presence, but it's not the presence of being, it's the givenness of myself and the world by means of their presence, but I don't experience being as such. This is the point of critique of the monistic theories of being by theories, by phenomenologies of life. Not that they take off from this purely experiential fact, which can be interpreted one way or the other. But Henri, for example, in the beginning of his Essence of Manifestation, develops an extensive critique of Heideggerian monism of being, getting rid of the concept of being and altogether. And I agree with Jim that if we don't predicate, we cannot do philosophy. But this is our language. This is our human language, the language of objectification. This language is what we use as a part of this technicized world, in a sense, or the human world, which is technicized. Andreas, I'll pass it on to you. Just give me one step more. So, and it's hard to do philosophy without objectification, but in philosophy of life, this is exactly the problem that they're trying to deal with. Teresa, for example, went at length to avoid the word being in favor of showing that it's a process of beingness. She used the word beingness, being careful not to turn being into a kind of a, not even an entity, but this foundational predicate that the whole of philosophy is hanging on. So it's hard because we are limited by our grammars. But if we want to, discuss a shared reality, then I think that the concept of being and the objectification which is linked to it, not just by means of language, but in our idea of reality, I think it's a very problematic point. And it's solidified by centuries of Catholic philosophy, of course, which takes being from Aristotle and then turns it into being with a capital B, which in Aristotle, I think it's not. So yeah, so that's just my footnote. And yeah, I don't know, Andy, Andreas maybe, or Jim, or
Yeah, why don't we hear Andreas? I think there's I have stuff to say about this. I know Jim does, and so we can go right back as well. And maybe Andreas can be a part of this.
Thank you so much, Randy. I shall try and be brief, although my English is limited. I'm a fluent speaker of Chinese, and there is predication quite as much as is with our Indo-European tongues. And there is one important book, Philosophy and Linguistics, by the late Johannes Lohmann, with O, not Luhmann with U, but O, Lohmann. I don't know whether that has been translated into English, and he deals a great lot with the ontologically different in opposition to indifferent languages. So the Eastern languages, Altaic, Sinitic, and Malaic, are indifferent, he says, and the Western Bantu, Semitic, or let's say Afro-Asiatic and Indo-European are different. That is to say, are concerned with ontological questions. Now, then I went to Georgia, not in the US, but in the Caucasus, in order to study a little Kartvelian, Georgian. And that was because their language does not have an accusative. They can't say, I love you, give me this bread, or I believe this is true, for there is no direct object in the whole language. However, it is only it is only the other way around. But in their language philosophy, as I was able to feel it somehow, only being a beginner in the language, it is also things in the conception are opposed to, let's say, me, the conceiver, very broadly. Now, Husserlianism, I think, appears at the Husserlian desk of a researcher. There is a plethora of athematic presuppositions necessary in order to do Husserlian philosophy. There is the Lutheran background, there is the feeling of need for universal justifiability, Verrechenschaftlichkeit, and Husserl answers to this. So not being very much into Hedwig Conrad-Martius, which I hope the community will excuse me, I would really, only seeing that the discussion has turned quite general, add something concerning fundamental phenomenology as much as I have so far been able to understand it, I hope. Now, intentionality is invisible, as is light which passes my eye. I can't see it until it strikes me. Intentionality is only experienceable, so to say, in the first-person perspective. But therefore, the world and the whole of what is experienceable, please forgive me this coinage, this coining, is my personal subjective individual experience. So if I can be able, with Husserl, I think for the first time in humankind, he did this and he achieved it. If I can show how I must think in order to be able to do predications, in order to think contiguously with identification, with retentions, pretensions, with the horizon, how do you say, I think in English you can also say the fringe. There must be a parathematic fringe to a theme in my rhetoric enunciations. Now, if I can show that there is a certain necessary structure in order for me to be able to expound how I think at the most inalienable level, and if this shows to be transposable to other thinkers, which can then discover these same indispensabilities within their operational thinking, then I got some kind of let's maybe spare the word, but it's a structuralism of what is thinkable at the most fundamental level. And then from this upwards, I can do a first step. I think Husserl in his social philosophy, which is, as I know, very rarely been researched in his social philosophy, declares openly, if I do the first step and I dare one first insecurity in order to accept interpersonality, for I will never have direct experience of the reality of individual experience with other persons. But if I do this, then I arrive at a world first and foremost of individua, of persons perceiving themselves and interacting with each other, maybe telepathically or via a certain world between them. And then only in a third position or on a third rank enters what we think to be a world. Now, Heidegger, please forgive me, I try to be brief, seems for me to be somehow a Marx of Husserlianism. For he puts things not on the feet, but on the head. You understand what I mean? He ontologizes. I don't know how to form in English. He re-ontologizes Husserl's phenomenological standpoint. And for he was a man of his age that gained much popularity. In fact, he sold out the most important achievements of Husserlianism by re-attributing so much to the world. But maybe the world with all its colored regional ontologies may be interesting. But what is more interesting is we could all be angels in a sphere without world, only consciousness envisaging consciousness, as they pray in the hesychastic prayer with the late Byzantine Orthodox, prosopon vis-a-vis prosopon, face unto face. That's the state of the angels. And all which is world, in the sense of the modern science, pertains to a certain personal technique of coercive experimentation. Can I force things to produce the same output again? And that is posited to be the foundation of the outward reality. Apparently, in the beginning, this is a movement of desubjectivization and of depersonalization also. This has very much to do with early modern government and domination technique. There is no need to build a bridge between hard science and the life world, for hard science is a slim, how do you say, if this is a spectrum, it is a slim portion of what is possible in the life world, with a certain very rigid and petrified grammar and methodology. But it is nothing outside life world. The fundamental reality doesn't need faith if I trust, so to say, my own experience, which I must do unless discussion end, And if I can show certain necessities in the proceedings of my dealings with myself, so to say, my thought envisaging itself, and if I can translate this for others and they find it in themselves, then I can establish interpersonality. Now, please forgive me if that was very unorderly, but quite a bunch of ideas to what had been hinted at.
This is great. Thank you, Andreas. Yeah, I think, and I would like to hear, a continuation of what we were saying before. And with this, I think some important thing that you were bringing up is, how do we reconcile things? Like, how do we interface these? Because when my response to Olga, that kind of like the posing of a kind of antagonism in a sense between phenomenologies of life like Henri and maybe Bergson and Tymoniecka. See, I harmonize them like maybe like the way Neoplatonists will harmonize Plato and Aristotle when they shouldn't be or something. I go ahead and I try to see how they have this some kind of common core, maybe this life, in its effulgent flux, this Heraclitean flux, and therefore not beings, static entities, but becomings or beingnesses or something. I think that the common foundation would necessarily have to be the same. I mean, that's certainly how I'm going to take it in my head, and then if I choose to express that, then maybe I'm violating some of the things that Tymoniecka herself said, and maybe something that if Conrad-Martius could time travel and interact with Tymoniecka, maybe they wouldn't get along, and they would say they have different views or whatever. But I think that instead, if you put Aristotle and Plato and Tymoniecka and Conrad-Martius in the same room, they would be like, this is great, we're figuring it out, finally. We need to tell the people outside the room so they can calibrate their universities and their science institutes and their society and their culture and their consciousness. See, I think that there is a way of seeing them as doing the same kind of thing, and and so I have my views on that. I'm curious, look, Jim, like you wanted to maybe respond to Olga then. Do you want to respond now to this kind of stuff?
Well, I if I understand you right, Olga, there is a kind of bridge problem.
No, Jim, just let me correct just for a second. I don't see a bridge problem. I see that the concept of being needs to be worked with. That's the only thing I'm saying. But worked with, not taking it for granted, but making further steps in clarification and, examining different other concepts which can be related. Objectification, I mean, as a faculty of the mind.
Yeah, I still think that's a bridge problem. I think
Okay.
that I think that the issue here is for anybody to start talking about the mind versus something else outside the mind, you've already kind of lost the game, if that's going to be the original thesis. You've made a distinction, which is foundational, just like Randy was proposing a metaphysics of Heraclitean flux. But to show that in a way, and I put on my Husserl hat at this case, in this instance, it has to be evident. It has to be compelling as a first principle, and to have to say that the mind is a self or consciousness is a self-contained entity and has to struggle with reality or how to get to reality or how to get to being is, I think, probably an unwinnable proposal.
But I don't say that, Jim.
Okay, then would you be comfortable with saying that that we never do not know being?
No, I'm not. I think the way you formulated the problem is Cartesian. And from here, the whole transcendental problem would arise if we dichotomize the mind and the world. I don't think this is the case. Actually, I think that I don't think we can be a community of angels even, because the moment we posit something like this, we already posit the other. And if they posit the other, we posit the world. And I do think that, and this is my practice, proves it to me, that the mind emerges from the world. I think it's completely inworlded. And without the world, there would be no mind, so to say. The question, though, is in what terms do we think this inworldment? Whether we think it putting objects first, or whether we think it putting relationships first. I think that the problem in, let's say, if to go Husserlian, which I prefer, he has the concept of the real object and the concept of intentional object. And formally, any object is intentional. But then we talk also about the real object. And so we have relationships that we need the concept of intentional object to describe. Intentional object is just the means of describing relationships. But then there is a real object to which this intentional relationship is somehow intended. And so what I'm thinking, what comes from Teresa, that life is much more identical with the kind of relationships which in this case exist, rather with the fact of the objectified givenness of the object in itself. It's the question of which one to put prior, relationships to the object or the object per se. That's the thesis.
Well, I don't know where to begin, but
I understand. Yeah.
I think the prior problem, Olga, for me is how would you, if you were to say, I mean, when you speak of the intentional relationship or intersubjective relationship or any other relationship, presumably you would have one term. You'd either have two filled intentions, two filled terms, or you would have one term looking for its other term. And it would seem to me prior to that, certainly in some sense chronologically prior to that, you have consciousness. And consciousness is in some sense always of.
Always what?
Of something.
Of something, okay.
And the problems start to arise when you start saying that of which you are conscious. And if you want to suggest that I can't be conscious of anything apart from my being conscious of another subjectivity, which I thought you were saying, then I would ask you how you know that. Now you could bring in empirical psychology or child psychology, but then you've lost the game to empirical science. I think the fundamental issue is intentionality, but we have to realize that intentionality itself is derived from an original consciousness of. And once we realize that, when we start saying, filling in what we mean by a consciousness of, say in terms of a perception or a certain kind of act of attending or addressing or remembering or expecting, we realize right away, and this is pure Husserl, not only are we consciousness of objects, but we're conscious of our consciousness of, but in a different sense. And Husserl's point would be, and I would side with him on this, about this, there's no discussion. I mean, this is a fundamentum inconclusum. This is where we begin.
Sure, yeah.
And so the original point, an original point is, what is that of which we are originally aware, which leaves nothing out? What is that which we're bracketing to get the show off the road in order to be phenomenologists rather than naive realists? Well, that's being.
Yeah, well, that's the refocusing. We can refocus from being to the vector, to the relationship vector.
We begin with being. We begin with being, because that's what we withdraw from in order to have the vector, in order to realize that being is in fact in correlation with our wakefulness. And
well, alternatively, we can begin with life.
I doubt it.
So I want to point to Andreas, but I also, can I just say one thing? So in Plato, there's this beyond of being, right? Epikeneia tes ousias, beyond being, and somehow that is the framework for what we call being in Plato, one of the 5 great kinds, or however he characterizes it in different dialogues. And then being is the framework in turn for, this is a hierarchy for forms, or maybe it's on the same level or it's doing something with them, but in any case, then the world comes out of that, like the sensibles down below the forms, right? And this is the noetic realm, but being is above that. And the beyond of being, that's not nothingness in the sense of privation or something, but it's somehow beyond being. That's the ultimate foundation in Plato, in classic Platonism. But I do detect in the history of the idea of being this kind of thing, where being isn't just the ultimate thing is being, but rather being also means this thing that's like being beyond being, and it's got a super essential nature where it's beyond ousia, beyond substantiality, beyond substantial being. And all this needs to be worked out, because like the idea of nothingness isn't just like the privation, like for the present in the past and into the future, but das Nichts. And Conrad-Martius knew this because she was translating Jakob Boehme, with at the time. Das Nichts is this Christian mystical idea of nothing, where it's the more ultimate thing, or maybe even some people will equate being with nothing. So it's different than like the dictionary definition of the word being, like a being's like a thing, the more like natural inclination, the natural attitude is like being is like, this thing. Well, so there's this matter, and for me, and this is like where I'm coming from when I see Tymieniecka and Conrad-Martius with life and with being. I feel like there is a common foundation, because the relation between being in the primordial sense and the beyond of being in the sense of like something even super primordial or just primordial also, that kind of relation is already a kind of a friction, a variation, a like primordial vacillation or something that is the engine of the dynamism of the beings and of things that have being in their becoming. You know, everything that is exploding into being, maintaining itself, a dissipative structure, dissipating and maintaining, you know, in its homeostasis, a being in that sense, it has that like flux in it. And so there's like a foundational situation between these ideas, nothingness, a super abundance, and not just like emptiness, but like an emptiness that is fullness. So I know, so Andreas and then Sally.
I just have one little, that's why sometimes you hear people who have mystical experiences, they say it was more real than reality. That's
right. Yeah. And I also think that's part of the pleonastic formulation, Wirklichkeit, you know. You find pleonastic formulations when like one word isn't enough. You know, it's not enough. There's something more going on here. Andreas?
Now, we are deep in historical first philosophy, that is to say theology. And I think if we want to deal with affairs in a philosophical fashion, aphatic theology and negative theology, or on the other hand, the Sanskrit anama rupa, I think they are all nonsensical, for they can be hinted at, but they cannot be treated. They cannot be dealt with, and therefore we should rightfully exclude them from our dealings, for they bear all signs of paralinguistical hypostasization. Sorry, I think in German. They are reified. They are not, you know, the das nichts. Well, there are several kinds of negation. Now, which does it pertain to? And now, the problem is, if we posit a world outside, then there may be wonders beyond wonders, and maybe beyond space there is hyperspace or whatsoever. But is this sensible to deal with things like this? I think no, for this posits first an outward world in which we are small. I still here ring the Genesis story. Somebody built a pet shop and then put us inside. That is not very, it just doesn't make sense. So being can be understood at least in under two aspects. For example, something is real, like it exists in the outward world. Or I can say there is a phenomenon which I have truly experienced. For example, a dream is real, for I have really had this dream. But then I can go even further. If I say a potentiality, for example, something which is not actualized, but which is possibly true and maybe betimes comes into being and sometimes remains latent, then without the thing itself being real, its potentiality is real. Now we get back to that grammar question. There is one place I remember the exact locus where Aristotle says, being is what remains with the following operation. If I say the dog barks, for ancient Greek had no continuous tense, it is equivalent to the dog is barking. And if I say the dog is barking, now the dog is barking. What does barking mean? To be barking means to be barking. Now he is being barking. Do you get it? And then it goes ever so on. To bark means to be barking, and to be barking means to be being barking. Do you understand? And so on. Now, to be is as fundamental as identification of anything I conceive of, first of all, is. Now, in this sense, to be is indispensable, but that is not the being, I think, which Husserl's critique of the naive Seinsgewissheit, the naive perceived surety of being is directed at. If we can, if we can take all this back into our individual experience, then I think it becomes coherent.
Thank you. Yeah, anyone want to respond to that?
Yeah, if I may, I think I followed everything Andreas says, and I think I agree with just about all of it. This is bring back to Conrad-Martius for a second. Those passages around 130 or so in the little book, The Sign, makes the point that I think is what I'd like to make myself, is that there's between the very essence of mind as intellect is inseparable from some notion of being, and Andreas rightly points out that it's not real being, and we talk about that in the chapters there. It's not merely ideal being, it's not necessarily real being, it's not imaginative being, it's not possible being, and so forth. There is a sense of something there. And that something there, Kant himself, in that marvelous little text, a very early text on the only possible proof for the existence of God, prior to his confining all senses of being to just a predicative tie, saw a sense of being in that there is something, is the Parmenidean is. But Andreas is absolutely right that this is certainly Conrad-Martius, that initial universal extension of the mind's luminosity. It's not confined to real being, which is a very complex subsequent sense of being that we sort out by the relationship between when something is proposed to our belief in an empty intention, and we raise away, well, what would make that true, or how would that become a filled intention? And use the example of, so there's a lion in the hallway. There could be, and that could be a good example for an ideal being, an art, a paper mache lion. It could be a painting of a lion. It could be all sorts of, and then you'd walk out and say, yeah, there's a lion in the hallway. It's a such and such being, but it isn't a real lion. It isn't really a lion in the hallway, and so forth. But all those are subsequent distinctions from the original one. The consciousness is inseparable from the manifestness of being. Manifestation is co-extensive with consciousness, and that which consciousness is aware, which consciousness brings to light, is some sense of being. All intentional objects fall under some sense of being. So we have the dream consciousness, on and on and on. But there's no consciousness which isn't aware of being. So we don't have a problem getting to being. Now, any theory which is going to suggest a bridge or a linguistic prison or a cultural prison overlooks the consideration for those propositions to be said to be true have to be demonstrable. And the mind has built into us, like Leibniz says, there's nothing in the intellect except which is in the senses except the intellect. So it's something even being merely sensibly evident might not be enough for an analytic proposition or complex analytic proposition, because you're freed of senses. And so any conceptual argument doesn't talk about senses. But the interest in truth is not something we've learned. And clarity is not something we've learned. They're there from the start, but being is all that. And in the ancient metaphor, which Conrad-Martius adopts, and Husserl rarely adopts, very, very, very rarely adopts, is light, a kind of the light of being. But that light includes possible being, metaphorical being, empty intentions, filled intentions, mathematical objects, so forth and so on.
And it's the life too, isn't it? I mean, there's the statement in John, but I mean, I think Conrad-Martius has that in mind, and I think, right? So it's really not, maybe this is another bridging proposition, or between the Timonetsky and sort of phenomenology of life, also maybe Bergsonian and ultimately Heraclitean stuff about life, also being like the light of being.
Well, I think we have just when you slip in light and say in the context of Conrad-Martius, you're talking about a mode of being, a kind of being. If you're equating life with consciousness, then you've made a move that would require considerable discussion. But as a region in the sense of a regional ontology, living things are different, say, than non-living things. And spirit is not captured by life. And the question of there being conscious, that there being forms of life which are not conscious is a legitimate position. 90% of the world holds it.
90% of the world eats meat too.
But what's interesting, however, in all this is that in terms of the relationship of life, light, consciousness, and being, is that consciousness is not only consciousness of, but consciousness is self-conscious. It's also conscious of consciousness. Consciousness is always erlebt. There's the living word. Consciousness is alive. We call it lived experience. So it's always not only illuminating of something else, but it's self-luminous.
And of course, that's what Henri means by life.
Right.
And so he does, in a sense, equate consciousness with life, but not biological life, but life in exactly the sense you're defining here. And then I think for him, the whole problem is that I think he fails. He both depends on acceptance of objectivity in a way, but completely fails to account for that. There's another thought that if we accept the idea that the presence of being constitutes consciousness itself, and that the presence of being is not one or another kind of being, it's neither potential nor actual, nor it's something that somehow underlies all that. So there's some deeper sense of being that somehow grounds all these different, and then that deeper sense is precisely what constitutes or defines each conscious being. What does that say about the mode of the being of the conscious being? If our very being is somehow constituted by this deeper sense of being that transcends things like actual and potential. I don't know, that's just a question that popped into my head.
So we are over time. This is terrific. This is where philosophers should dwell, is in the questions of being and philosophies of life and becoming and being and non-being and all that. So but we need to wrap it up and let's plan on, shall we continue this every 2 weeks thing? We loving it. So maybe May 14, which is the Friday in the middle of May. Everyone check out your calendars.
What do we read, Randy?
Oh, let's definitely we weren't looking so carefully at the text. Let's continue any chapter 2 stuff, but let's get into chapter 3. So maybe we could just start with chapter 3, but maybe also allow for any further discussions from chapter 2. Especially early on, Jim mentioned the pneumatic being, and I think this does continue the discussions we're having and the discussions we found in chapter 2 about substantial being and real being and all that kind of stuff. So the pneumatic.
I think what we've been talking about are some really fundamental questions that pertain to the whole perspective within which he's thinking. And
Yeah.
I feel like we've really been, and then I think it's been very helpful to sort of get into that and hash that out. And then having done that, I think we're in a much better position to sort of to take it apart with, and there's a lot in chapter 3. It's in, and so I think I think we're in a position to work with that further now.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Randy, a question: where do you want to post the recording, or what do you want to do with the recording?
Yeah, I'm
Well-
well, so you posted on YouTube the recording from like a month and a half ago. That was so cool. I think that I've been able to share it on social media as well, and it just looks rad, and I think that it does only good, you know.
Yeah, well, if you post, send me the link, and I'll upload it on the website. Just
Okay,
send
great. Yeah, I'll send you the video.
when you have it live, send me the link. Okay.
Yeah. Okay, great. So again, it's May 14, Friday, 2 weeks from now, middle of May. See you all there.
Good seeing everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.